Hi everybody, Adam Steele from Hot Pole Studios here, and today we're going to be talking about the Torpedo Cab M from Two Notes. This tiny little cab simulator has some real cool new features that are a massive upgrade on the old Torpedo Cab. So let's check it out and talk some nerdy details. First things first, if you're not aware of what the Torpedo range is, these are very clever little guitar cabinet simulators that if you've already got a guitar setup and you can't put microphones in front of the cabinet for whatever reason, whether it's because when you're playing live, the cabs are in the wrong place, or you don't have any availability to use a cabinet, or anything like that, this is where these kind of clever things come in. And there are a few in the range. The Torpedo Live has a load box in, so you can get a 100 watt valve head and plug that straight into it, and it will just take the load, and it will also do some cabinet emulation. The older Torpedo Cab was just the cabinet emulation part of that, so it wasn't a load box, but if you had something like a tube preamp, you could run into one of these, and that's where the Cab M comes in. Look at the size difference there. The original Torpedo Cab was pretty chunky. You really had to kind of justify having it on your pedal board because it's pretty big, and the Cab M is teeny tiny. And I measured it, it's the exact same height as something like a Boss pedal, and is just a little wider than a Boss pedal. So if you've got a pedal board where you've got standard size pedals, this will fit very nicely right next to your standard compact pedals. For me, that's a huge plus. Now, the things that this can do are a serious upgrade from the traditional Torpedo Cab. The actual cabinets themselves, I think, sound better because they've got more memory in here. They can load up a bigger cabinet impulse, I think that's the case. They can definitely load longer IRs, impulse responses, if you're not using Two Notes' own proprietary cabinet format. One thing that people were absolutely screaming for on the previous Torpedo Cab, it's now here, is the XLR out. You don't need a DI box, not that you ever technically needed a DI box, but this says to audio engineers, just plug me in, get signal, done. It's so much easier because even though there was balanced TRS output on the jack on the Torpedo Cab, a lot of engineers are going to look at that and go, no, I'm plugging that into a DI box because they expect to see an XLR output, and now they can have that sorted. It's even got a ground and lift switch so that if it's causing problems in terms of a hum and a buzz, you can click a button and that's gone. There's also a separate line out, so if you're running into a little, say, powered full range cabinet or something like that, you can do that at the exact same time as giving the front of house that XLR output. I think that's really, really handy. Now, on the other side, we've got a micro USB port, which is a tiny little bit more flimsy than the old one, which had a big chunky USB port. But that's not too bad, because it shouldn't get used too often. I've used the USB once now to upgrade the firmware and load a few of my own custom Hot Pole Studios cabinets onto there. Hint, hint. Today's video is brought to you by us with our Hot Pole Studios cabinets on the Two Notes store. Check them out. The big beast is a Zilla 4x12 cabinet, vintage 30s. We've got more Zilla cabinets coming out. We've got the Fat Boys, we've got the Fat Babies, all in the Two Notes boutique store. Very, very cheap. So, back to that. You can load your own cabinets through there, but then you don't have to use that very much because you can control the Cab M with your iPad or your iPhone. So there is now a specific app for that, and at some point I'm going to cut away to doing a little demo of showing you how that software works. So you can use that out on stage, you can just pull out your iPhone and you can change a preset. There are also two knobs here that both click in, so if you've got your presets already, you can just lean down and change preset with a slight tick of a knob. The screen on this is smaller than on the original Cab, but it's much more detailed and much brighter, much clearer. And the way they've done it, the original one was just 2 rows of digits, like on real old machinery. The new one is a full dot matrix, so they can do things like The preset number is massive, so you can see the 01, 02, 99, because there's 99 user presets, and you can see them all from a long way away, so you know that the right cabinet has been selected. Unfortunately, MIDI is missing from this. That seems to be the trade-off, and something that Two Notes was saying is it wasn't in massive demand, so if you do really need MIDI and you don't need the load, then the older Torpedo Cab is probably what you're looking for, and they still have a few in stock as far as I know. Although if you're watching this a couple of years in the future, they probably don't. But that's a feature that is at this time missing. I don't know if they're going to be able to implement MIDI over Bluetooth or MIDI over USB or something. I don't know if that's a possibility. But one thing I do know is that the hardware inside the Cab M is far more advanced than the older Torpedo Cab, which means there's much more room for upgrades in the future, because they'd only just updated the Torpedo Cab original to be able to do 2 microphones on the same cabinet, which I made a video on, which you'll find in the card up there, and this can do all that straight from the off with the original firmware, so any upgrades from there will be even more impressive because it's got much newer hardware in there. Something that's definitely worth talking about is the 2 jack ports on the side. The original Torpedo Cab had a single jack for the input, which was fine, that's what you're doing, you're sending a signal into it. This one has 2. One is called amp in, or instrument line in, and the other one is speaker out. Now, to reiterate what I was saying before, this is not a load box. If you were to get, say, a 100 watt valve head and plug the speaker output straight into here and leave that as the setup, something's going to go bang. Whether it's the amp or whether it's this, something's going to fry. So you can't do that. But what you can do, and the reason they've designed this, is you can plug that valve amp, the speaker out into here, and then the speaker out chained through to a real cabinet. So you can have this in between. So if, say, you want to take a sound out for front of house at a live show, you can have this with your full valve power amp and take the sound out of that. Still get sound on stage through your speaker cabinet and take the virtual mic'd up thing from here to front of house. So they're very happy because there's no microphone on stage, there's no bleed, there's no chance of it being knocked, there's no chance of it being in the wrong position. So that, for me, is absolutely fantastic. The other thing you can do is, if you are absolutely intent on silent recording and you want to use one of these, you can combine it with something like a Two Notes Torpedo Captor. This is a load box, and this can take 100 watts. And so what you can do is you can run from a valve amp, like I've got my PV6505 next to me, which technically, yes, I know it's a 120 watt head, but no one ever runs it near full power. And you can chain the speaker output through the Torpedo Cab M to the Captor and use this instead of a speaker load, and that's still relatively affordable doing it that way. That way you can record in the middle of the night with a screaming valve head. You don't need to power the Captor's circuitry if you're doing that, because you're not actually using the outputs on it, you're literally using it as a load box. You power your Cab M, which is, by the way, as a tangent, still 12 volts negative tip, same negative tip that you get on a general stomp box pedals, but 12 volt instead of 9, but now it requires 200 milliamps of power rather than the older one, which used 300, I think it was. Which means that if you want to use this with, say, a pedal multi-power, something like a Seox or Voodoo Labs power unit on a board, as long as you use a 12 volt output with this that can handle 200 milliamps, that's absolutely fine. And I've been using this with a portable power supply that I got from Toman, of all people. I got one of their properly isolated power supplies, which is actually isolated, and it's more expensive than the cheap ones they do. Don't worry about that. But here's a little couple of clips from the podcast that I recorded last night, the Hot Pole Position, where we made a theme tune for the station. We're not a radio station. We made a little theme song for the podcast using the 6505 on the lead channel and using the sound straight out of the Cab M. So no real cabinets, no real microphones, and it sounded like this. Today we're really putting the Torpedo Cab M through its paces. This is actually wired so that we can see the Torpedo remote application right here, and we can play around with it. I've got a PV6505, which is a real high gain tube monster that's running, well, it's not running at 120 watts, but it could if you wanted it to. And it's running into a torpedo captor, which is running through the Cab M. Keep in mind the Cab M is not a load box. Yes, so this is a PV6505. Oh, there's the tone. I think that's fairly impressive for a little piece of gear like that. And that meant that I could record using my real settings and be perfectly happy with the results. I mean, would I go back and mic it up in a studio with real microphones and real cabs? Given the time, I probably would do that, but I definitely just wanted to show this off. But there are loads of situations where having a 100-watt tube head and a 4x12 cabinet roaring is just not appropriate. So this has loads and loads of different places. I mean, I've seen photos of guys using two of the older Torpedo cabs with valve preamps on arena stages. And this thing's quite chunky. And if you can literally fit two of the new one in the same space. So you could run them, and by the way, they're cheaper than the original Torpedo Cab, probably to do with manufacturing and better technology and newer parts and that kind of thing. And so you could run a stereo set of these for not much more money than the original one in mono in the same footprint. That's crazy. Another clever little thing that I've noticed is there is a micro SD card in the back. So it comes with a 256 megabyte micro SD card, which I'm guessing is where you store all your impulse responses and that kind of thing, so it's not going to run out of space anytime soon. And if it does, you can just put a bigger micro SD card in. So absolute props to Two Notes for thinking of doing that rather than in building the memory and then setting a hard limit. Very clever. I'm going to cut now to doing a couple little pieces in Studio B at home with a La lead pedal and a La bass pedal, and maybe stick a boost in front of the lead or something like that just to play around, or a Rev G4. And between them and the Cab M, I'm going to record a couple of pieces and get some decent tones with absolutely no processing in the DAW at all. So literally as if I was giving this sound to a front of house guy and he didn't have to do much in the way of EQ or anything. No cab simulation or anything on his end, which means that live, I can literally take an XLR and go to the engineers and go, there you go, use this. Okay, everybody, in today's clip, we're going to see that I'm playing a bass with the Two Notes La bass preamp through the Cab M, which is of course the star of the show, but we're controlling the Cab M through this iPad here using the new Torpedo remote software on Bluetooth. When I first turned the software on, it asked me to go into the menu on the Cab M and find a PIN number, and then put that in on the iPad for security so that people can't, hijack your settings mid-show or anything like that. It is secure, which is a good start. And let's hear how this sounds. Sounds pretty decent to me. Now, the reason that this is useful with an iPad is the Cab M has a pretty useful little screen with two knobs and little rotaries, so if you're stuck out in the middle of nowhere and you need to change a setting, you can go and dive in and do that, and you can see loads of little text with all little bits of info, including the input and output actually has meters on now, which is a big improvement over the old version. I can see the input and output going, but on this screen here on the iPad, I can see all that in a lot more detail. Check this out. So I'm running the clean channel of the La Bass. You can hear it's quite a clean tone. And I've picked the Bass Beast cabinet. One thing that I can't seem to do right now with the remote software is load new cabinets in. As far as I know, at time of filming, you have to plug it into a USB connection to get the cabinets on and load the actual cabinets in. The presets and all that kind of stuff and changing is what we're going to look at now. So if you want to load new cabinets into the Torpedo Cab, you have to do that first, and that goes for impulse response files as well. So in this bass preset, I started off with everything off, apart from just the one microphone on the bass cab. There's no reverb on here, so it's quite greyed out, but you can see that I've chosen the Bass Beast cab, which is a 4x10 cab from Zilla that was captured by, me. So, complete disclaimer, I make cabs for the Two Note Store if I haven't already mentioned that. So it sounds fairly decent. So it's a tube preamp, but then it's just the tube preamp. So what I'm going to do first is turn on the power amp emulation. And if I click on the little icon, it gives me a list of all the different styles. I like for bass to either use KT88s or 6L6s. I think I like 6L6s the best. You use them in things like the Mesa Bass 400 Plus amp, which has 12 6L6s in it. It just has a certain sound that for bass just is right. You can choose between pentode and triode mode. You can bump the volume if it's a bit quiet. And then there's an EQ, so if the sound isn't quite right, it's already set in bass mode, so I can bump up any frequencies or cut anything that I don't want. And as you can see, this is much faster to do than it is on the cab M itself. I can choose a reverb. If I turn that on, I can choose from a drop down the different types. I can add a bit. I like to have it around 10% because I find that especially live, any more than that's overkill, and any less than that it can be really quite dry, especially when it's just you playing. Depending on how the room you're in sounds. If you're in a theatre that's completely dampened, I find that extra little bit of reverb helps. If you're in really quite a live room, that kind of extra reverb won't really do anything, but it's so small an amount that I don't tend to find it negatively affects it, which is why I leave it there. The microphone, I've got my drop-down list of 8 here, so I'm going to pick, in this case, let's pick the Gem 2, which is the SE Electronics Gemini, which is a big fat condenser mic. And we by default are, you can look in devices, you can have more than one in here if you really want. If you want to control all the different ones for your entire band, perhaps. You've got 3 of these, 2 guitarists and a bass player, you could then switch between them. If you're out in the front of house and they're playing away, you could then tweak the tones subtly and then do that for each person. That's pretty cool to me. And so that covers all the iPad stuff, and it was so much faster than doing it on the machine. But here's the really clever thing. Now, as of this week, you don't just have to use an iPad. You can use an iPhone. As far as I know, the Android version is already ready. So, yes, iPhone time. I'm going to get a guitar, switch the La Bass out for a La Lead, and show you the phone version. Alright, so here we are with the guitar with the 2 notes lead engaged, and it sounds like this. Cool. So as you can see from the screen, there's a bit less to work with. I'm using an iPhone 7, and so the screen's not huge, but it's still nice to have the whole touch thing, which is still quicker than using 2 knobs and scrolling through menus. So you can change your reverb type to whatever one you like. If I change that back to pentoed mode, a bit less presence on the EL34s we've chosen this time. We can mute the mic. Maybe I could put a 57. Here's an interesting thing that you can do. If I get something like a 57, same as the front mic, but in the back. And then add that in with the main mic. So as I'm reaching over, you can see me turning things on and off there, and it's so nice to be able to just do things like that. If I get a bit of a boost, 800, bit less at the top, 6K. You can get a real classic rock sound very quickly with just a single mic. And then you can see that there's no cabinet choice here, but at the bottom there's a button that says cabs. And from here you can pick different 1x12s, 2x12s. Let's go for that rev open back. Maybe not appropriate for this one. Let's try the rev closed back. See, there's always options. If we turn the treble down on the preamp, turn the bass up a little to match this cab. Change it from push-pull to single-ended EL84. Triode mode. There's plenty of options here, and I'm controlling this on my phone, so I could do this. Say I turn up at a venue, I've got my preset, I've got my board, I'm happy, but I'm playing it in the room and there's something not quite right in the room. I can pull out my phone, look at the app, go, the mids are a little bit missing in this room. I'm just going to push that a little. Or the other way around. Or you can go, you know what, in this room, I need a little more reverb because it's quite dry. I want to have a second microphone in there, which I'm going to unmute. I'm going to make that something like U87, a little further back, just blend it in. Nice. So there's so many options. That didn't take me very long at all. And that can go after your pedal board. Like we said before, it can go in between the amp and the cab, or in between the amp and a load box. There's so much to do. Back to me, without all this lot in front of me. And being a live engineer myself, if someone gave me a sound like this to use at front of house, I would be over the moon. I'd just be like, yeah, great. Maybe shelve off a little low end live, depending on the speaker setup. Have a choice of either pushing out the mids or taking them back a little. But I'm not fighting anything like feedback. I'm not fighting bleed. I can literally just season it to taste with a touch of EQ live and just be like, hey, I'm done. That is an ideal setup for a live engineer, no matter how big the venue, because if you can just have those sounds pretty much ready to rock, very little on stage is going to stop that from being a great sound. And that's absolutely brilliant. There's also, just to mention quickly, a little switch for the input level, which means that if you're using this as a speaker loop through rather than using it with a preamp and it's too loud, you can just switch that level way down so that the absolute cranked volume that's coming through in high voltage doesn't peak. Or if it's really quiet for some reason, you're using a really quiet preamp, you can crank the level up with an extra 12 dB of boost. So it's all there. This tiny little thing has so many features. It's really, really impressive. And this will probably be hiding in my touring rig wherever possible. I mean, my little bass touring rig, to be honest right now, it's a 2 notes La Bass, the tube preamp. I've got a bass compressor, and I'm actually not using a cab emulation right now, which is really making my tone kind of suffer, but I really like to what's the word? I really like to run light. I really like to not have heavy gear with me when I'm playing, because quite often the shows that I do, I'm in and I'm out. And so having something like this where I can plug it in, have a preset for, say, an 8x10 with the right microphone in the right place, a little bit of EQ inbuilt, and a little bit of reverb even maybe on here, because it's got room reverbs, studio reverbs, cathedral reverbs. Probably a bit overkill, but it's there. And then I can have that XLR, goes out to front of house, they're happy, I'm happy. That means happy times for everybody. And I can't say enough good things about a pedal that if you need to record or even live have a sound without generating huge amounts of noise, or even if you are generating huge amounts of noise and you want that stability of sound, I can't recommend something like this enough. The Torpedo Cab M is available now. You'll find it in most good music retailers. Check it out. They're £250 or something like that. Maybe a little bit less now. Whereas the original Torpedo was 450 something. So this is a massive saving. Go out and get yourself one. And load up the Hot Pole Studios cabs on it. Thanks everybody. I'll see you in the next video. Goodbye. Thanks for watching, guys. If you enjoyed this, feel free to check out our other videos, as you can find here, or check out our Facebook and Twitter, or our Patreon page, which helps us to make more videos like this. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.